Late at night, the road felt long and quiet as Maya drove her small car toward home, the streetlights passing like slow stars and the radio playing low so she could think she was tired from work but calm and careful, and her mind stayed on simple things like the turn near the old store and the warm tea waiting at home, when suddenly red and blue lights burst behind her, filling the mirror with color. Her heart jumped once, then steadied as she slowed and pulled over to the side. She checked. Her signal checked her mirrors and stopped where the shoulder was wide, because she had learned to be careful even when she felt nothing wrong. She sat still with both hands on the wheel, breathing slow, telling herself to stay calm, because calm kept things clear. The night felt colder now, and too quiet as footsteps came closer and a flashlight cut through the dark, tapping the window. The officer asked for her license in a sharp voice, not loud, but typed like a door closing. Maya answered politely, her voice steady, though her chest felt tight. She handed over the card and waited, eyes forward. Another officer stood behind, watching, not speaking, and the silence felt heavy. The questions came fast. Where are you going? Where are you coming from? Do you live around here? Maya answered each one short and clear. She noticed how the officer did not meet her eyes and how the flashlight stayed too long on her hands. She felt a small wave of fear rise, but she pushed it down because fear could be mistaken and mistakes could grow. The officer stepped back to the car and spoke into the radio, words low and quick. Maya waited, listening to the hum of her engine and the far sound of a truck passing somewhere beyond the trees. Minutes stretched, and the night pressed closer when the officer returned, his tone colder than before. He said, "Step out of the car now." Maya blinked, surprised. She asked quietly, "May I know why?" And the officer repeated the order louder this time. Her fingers trembled as she opened the door and stepped out onto the gravel. The air smelled like rain and metal. Her hand shook, but her face stayed still, her eyes focused straight ahead, because she knew eyes could tell stories, even when mouths did not. The second officer moved closer, standing too near, and Maya felt the circle close around her. The first officer asked more questions about the car, about her name, about things she had already said, and the way he asked made it feel like a test. She could not see the answers to her thoughts raced, but her voice stayed calm. She kept her hands visible, the gravel pressed into her shoes, as she could feel her heartbeat in her ears. Passing cars, slow drivers stared, then moved on, and the feeling of being watched grew heavy. The officer told her to turn around and place her hands behind her back, and Maya froze for a breath, not in fear, but in careful thought, because every move mattered. She asked again, "Why?" and the answer came sharp, "Comply." Now the word comply rang in the night like a bell. Her hand shook more now, but her eyes stayed strong and steady. She turned, slowly, showing each move the way she had practiced in her mind many times, though she never thought she would need it. The officer stepped closer, and the cold click of cuffs seemed near, though they did not touch her yet. And in that moment, the audience would feel the tight knot in the stomach, the sense that something was wrong, but unclear, the kind of wrong that slips in quietly. The officer paused, looking at her posture, at the calm way she stood, and at the careful way she spoke. He asked if she had anything on her, weapons or drugs, and Maya answered, "No, sir," with a calm that did not break. The second officer shifted his weight, his hand near his belt, and the flashlight danced across the ground, then up her jacket, then her face, stopping there longer than before. The silence stretched again, broken only by the radio crackle and a distant dog bark. Maya felt the night breathe with her. She remembered small details, like the smell of wet leaves and the sound of her own breath, because noticing kept her grounded. The officer said, "You seem nervous," and Maya answered softly, "Anyone would be, sir," the truth plain and simple. But the officer did not soften. He said, "You were swerving back there," and Maya said, "No, sir, I was not." And she knew she had not, because she always watched the lines, always. The officer frowned and looked away, then back again, as if searching for something to justify the moment. The tension rose higher, like a wire pulled too tight. The audience would ask, why her? Why now? What was unseen beneath the surface Maya swallowed and kept her shoulders relaxed. She thought of home and the tea and the quiet couch and how far it felt. Now the officer asked her to wait and stepped aside, speaking low to his partner. They glanced at her, then at the car, then back again. The radio crackled names and numbers that meant nothing to her but carried weight. The minutes felt like hours, and the road felt empty. An exposed Maya stood still, hands visible, chin level, calm like a stone in moving water, but inside questions pressed hard. What was happening? Why was this different? Why did it feel like a line had been crossed without a word? The officer returned and said, "We need you to step farther from the car," and Maya obeyed slowly. Each step measured the gravel crunching loud in the silence. The second officer moved to block her view of the road, and that made her heart beat faster, because space mattered and being boxed in mattered. The officer asked again about where she worked and why she was out so late, and Maya answered again, her voice, even her words, simple. She could feel the eyes on her from the dark houses nearby, curtains shifting, phones lifting, and the weight of witness settled on the moment. The officer sighed like he was tired and said, "You know, this would be easier if you just relaxed." And Maya thought, "I am relaxed," but she did not say it, because saying it could sound like a challenge. Instead, she said, "I am cooperating, sir," and held her ground. The officer looked at her longer now, and something changed in his face. Not kindness, not anger, but uncertainty, like a door that did not open the way he expected. He asked her to sit on the curb, and Maya did. Her knees bent, and she sat slow and straight, keeping her hands visible on her lap. The cold seeped through her clothes, and the night air brushed her skin. She felt small and strong at the same time. A strange mix. The audience would feel the pull of the moment. The question hanging like fog. Why does this stop feel different? What is it about her calm, about her eyes, about the way she stands that shifts the air? The officer stepped back again and spoke into the radio, then looked at Maya and asked a new question, softer but still firm. "Have you ever been in trouble with the law?" And Maya lifted her eyes to meet his for the first time fully and said, "No, sir, not." "Like you mean?" And the pause that followed carried a promise that something more was coming, something unseen, waiting just beyond the edge of the night. Maya sat on the cold curb with her back straight and her hands resting where they could be seen, the gravel biting through her clothes as the night grew heavier around her. The police lights still flashed, painting the road in red and blue again and again like a slow warning. Her calm face hid the tight feeling in her chest, but she breathed the way she had taught herself, slow in, slow out, counting quietly to keep her thoughts steady. The officers stood a few steps away, talking in low voices and stopping every few seconds to look at her like she was a question they could not answer. Yet cars passed, but fewer now, and each one felt loud, then gone, leaving the road empty again. The silence between sounds made everything feel sharper. The wind, the radio crackled, the soft scrape of boots on the ground. One officer walked back toward her and asked her to stand again, his voice firm but not shouting. Maya stood slowly, showing her hands every second, because she knew speed could be misunderstood, and misunderstanding could change everything. The officer circled her once, not touching, but close enough that she could feel his presence like pressure in the air. He asked her to turn around, and she did. Then he asked her to turn back, and she did. Again, each move slow and clear. The second officer stayed near the car, shining a light inside, checking the seats, the floor, the back, as if searching for a reason that had not appeared yet. Maya watched from the corner of her eye, but kept her head still. The questions started again, but this time they felt different, less sharp, but more personal. Where she worked, how long she had lived in the area, who owned the car. She answered each one the same. Calm tones, simple words, no extra details, because extra words could twist. The officer nodded, but his eyes did not relax. He asked why she seemed so controlled, and Maya paused just a second, not because she did not know the answer, but because she knew the weight of it. She said softly she believed in staying calm in hard moments. The officer gave a small sound like a breath, not quite a laugh, and stepped back again. The other officer returned from the car and shook his head quietly, as if to say nothing found, and that seemed to tighten the mood instead of easing it. The air felt thick, like rain waiting to fall. Maya noticed a house nearby with a light on and a shape behind the curtain watching, and that knowledge brought both comfort and fear. Comfort, because witnesses mattered. Fear, because witnesses could misunderstand too. The officer asked her to place her hands on the hood of the car, and she did. The metal cold under her palms. The position felt exposed, and the night felt closer. She focused on her breathing again and on, keeping her shoulders loose. Her heart beat fast but steady. And she remembered telling herself long ago that fear was a signal, not a command. The officer checked her pockets quickly, without roughness, but without warmth either, and stepped back again. He said, "You are being detained for now." And the word, detained, hung in the air, heavy and unclear. Maya asked quietly, "What for?" And the officer said, "We are still figuring that out," which made the audience feel the unfairness, the open, and the waiting with no clear reason. The second officer paced a few steps, then stopped and asked her if she knew why she was pulled over, and Maya said, "No, sir, I meant it." The officer said, "A report came in about a car like yours," and Maya felt a small spark of confusion, because like yours could mean many things and nothing at all. She did not argue. She only nodded, because arguing could close doors instead of opening them. The officers stepped aside, again speaking low. Their voices carried pieces of words, but not the meaning. Maya stood still, hands on the hood, the cold seeping deeper now, and the lights flashing on her face. She felt time stretch thin and wide at once, and she thought about how moments like this could change lives, not because of what was done, but because of how it felt, the uncertainty, the lack of control, the waiting. The officer returned and asked her again if she had ever trained for stressful situations, and this time Maya looked at him fully, her eyes steady and clear, and said, "Yes, sir, I have." The officer raised his eyebrows slightly, surprised, and asked what kind of training, and Maya answered calmly, "Training to stay safe, training to stay aware, training to protect myself without causing harm." The officer studied her like a puzzle, turning in his mind. The second officer crossed his arms and watched her closely. The mood shifted just a little, like a door opening a crack, but not enough to see through yet. The officer asked where she learned this, and Maya said, "Through years of experience and study." The answer simple but loaded. The audience would feel the pull of curiosity, now stronger than before. What happened to her? What pushed her to prepare like this? The officer looked away, then back, and asked her to wait again, stepping toward the radio and speaking quietly. The road felt empty and exposed, and Maya felt the weight of standing alone under the lights. She thought about how easy it would be to let fear take over, to let anger rise. But she chose stillness instead, because stillness was her shield. The second officer moved closer and asked her softly if she was okay, and that small change in tone felt like a crack in the wall. Maya said, "Yes, sir, I'm okay. Just cold and tired." The officer nodded and stepped back again. The radio crackled, and a voice responded. The first officer listened and sighed, like a breath he had been holding. He walked back toward Maya, slower now, and said, "We are still checking a few things. Please stay where you are." Maya nodded and did not move. The lights continued to flash. The night continued to watch, and the audience would feel the pressure building, not with noise or action, but with waiting, with the sense that something important was close to the surface, something about Maya, something about why this moment was different from all the others. And as the officer turned back toward the car, the camera of the story would linger on Maya, standing there calm and steady, her secret still unspoken, but felt in every breath she took, promising that when it came out, it would change the meaning of everything that had happened so far. The night grew quieter as the officers stepped a little farther away, leaving Maya standing near her car with the cold metal still under her hands. The flashing lights slowed in her eyes as she focused on breathing and keeping her thoughts steady. The road felt empty again, but the tension stayed thick, like fog that would not lift. One officer spoke into the radio while the other watched her closely, his face Serious but no longer sharp, Maya could feel the shift, though it was small, like the first sign of dawn before the sky changes color. The watching officer asked her again about her training, his voice lower now, not demanding. But curious, Maya turned her head slightly enough to show she was listening and answered that she learned to prepare for difficult moments because life had taught her to. She did not give details. Yet, because some stories carried weight, and once spoken, they could not be taken back, the officer nodded. Slowly, as if trying to understand something new, he asked if she had been in situations like this before, and Maya paused just long enough for the audience to feel the question press against her past. She said, "Yes, but not in the way you think." The officer frowned lightly and asked what she meant. And Maya replied that she had learned how fast moments could change and how staying calm could keep people safe, including herself. The officer looked away toward the dark houses. Then back at her, his partner finished with the radio and joined them. His expression uncertain, not hard, not soft, just caught between two ideas, one about control and one about doubt. The partner said the report was unclear, and that the description did not fully match Maya or her car, but still something about the stop had taken its own shape and would not release them. Yet the first officer asked Maya to sit again, and she did, lowering herself slowly to the curb, the cold biting again, but she did not react. She placed her hands on her knees, palms open, eyes forward like she had practiced many times before. The officer asked her to explain what she meant when she said she was trained. Maya looked up at him, and for a moment the night seemed to hold its breath. She spoke carefully, choosing words that were simple and true. She said she had spent years learning how to handle pressure, how to protect herself without causing harm, and how to understand the rules that govern moments like this. The officer asked why, and the single word carried more weight than many questions. Maya felt the memory rise like a wave, but she held it back. Not yet. She said softly, because once you see how quickly things can go wrong, you prepare so they do not again. The second officer shifted his stance, uncrossing his arms, and asked if she worked in security or law, and Maya shook her head. "No, sir, I work a regular job. I just learned on my own." The officers exchanged a look, the kind that said this situation was not what they expected. The first officer rubbed his forehead and asked her to wait again, stepping aside to think. The silence returned, deeper, now filled with unspoken thoughts. Maya sat still, feeling the cold, but also feeling a strange calm settle in her chest, the calm that came when she knew she had done nothing wrong and was standing in her truth. The audience would feel the pull of her unspoken past, the sense that something important was close to the surface. The officer returned and crouched a few feet away, lowering himself to her level. A small change, but one that mattered. He asked her directly what happened that made her choose this path. Maya looked at him and saw not threat, but a human question, and she knew this was the moment where a door could open just a little. She did not tell the whole story, but she offered a piece. She said years ago someone she loved was caught in a moment like this, a moment full of fear and confusion, and that moment changed everything. She said she promised herself she would never be unprepared again. The officer listened quietly and did not interrupt. The second officer looked down at the ground, then back at Maya, as if seeing her differently. Now the road felt less empty and more like a place where something important was unfolding. The officer asked if the person she loved was okay, and Maya paused again, then said they survived, but the scars stayed. Not all scars could be seen. The words settled between them, heavy but clear. The officer nodded slowly and stood back up. He said, "Thank you for explaining, and for the first time." His voice carried respect, not suspicion. The second officer stepped back and said quietly that they should finish the check and let her go soon. The first officer agreed, but added that they still needed a few minutes to be sure. Maya nodded and waited. Patience was something she had earned over time, not given freely. The flashing lights continued, but felt less harsh now, more like signals than threats. The houses nearby seemed quieter, the watching shapes less tense. The officer walked back to the car and spoke into the radio. One last time, his tone calm and measured. Maya sat and breathed and felt the weight of the moment shift again. The audience would sense that the story was turning. Not with action, but with understanding. The officer returned and stood in front of her, saying they were clearing things up and that she would be free to go soon. But before stepping away, he asked one final question. He asked if she ever feared that her calm might be mistaken for something else. Maya looked up and answered honestly, yes, that fear never leaves, but fear does not decide my actions. The officer took a breath and nodded like someone who had learned something unexpected. He stepped aside, and the night seemed to loosen its grip just a little. The secret was still not fully told, but its shape was clear now, and it hung in the air, promising that when it was finally revealed, it would change. Not just this stop, but the way everyone watching would understand what strength really looked like. Maya stood again when the officer asked her to, this time without the sharp edge in his voice, and she noticed the change right away, because small changes mattered in moments like this. The night air still felt cold, but the space around her felt less tight, like a knot slowly loosening. The first officer rested his hands at his sides, not near his belt anymore, and that small detail told its own story. He asked her if she was willing to explain more about what she had said before, about the moment that changed her life. Maya took a slow breath and nodded, because she felt the time had come to speak, not in anger, not in fear, but in truth. She said years ago she had watched someone she loved go through a stop very much like this one. A simple night, a quiet road, a moment that should have ended quickly, but did not. She explained that the person was confused and scared, and did not know what to say or how to move, and that confusion turned into chaos, not because anyone wanted it, but because fear grew faster than understanding. She spoke slowly, her words clear and steady. The officers listened without interrupting. The flashing lights still moved, but felt distant now, like something happening far away. Maya said that night taught her that silence could be dangerous and panic could be misunderstood, and she promised herself she would never stand in a moment like that without knowledge again. She told them she studied the law, not deeply, like a lawyer, but enough to understand her rights and her duties. She trained her body not to fight, but to stay controlled, to move slowly, to breathe through fear, to keep her hands visible, to speak clearly, even when her heart raced. She said she practiced calm the way others practiced strength, because calm could save lives, including her own. The second officer shifted closer, not in pressure, but in interest, and asked her where she learned all this. And Maya said from books, from classes, from listening to stories, from people who had been hurt, and from people who wished they had known more sooner. She said she did not train to challenge police or to cause trouble. She trained so moments would not turn into memories that hurt forever. The first officer looked down at the ground for a long second, then back at her, and said quietly that not many people explained it that way. Maya nodded and said not many people were asked the right way. The words were simple, but they landed with weight. The road felt still, and the houses nearby seemed to lean in as if listening. The officer asked if she was scared right now, and Maya answered honestly yes, but fear did not control her choices. She said fear was something she carried, not something she followed. The second officer took a slow breath and said that he had never heard someone talk about training like that, and Maya said most people only noticed training when it looked loud or strong, not when it looked quiet and steady. The first officer nodded again, and his shoulders dropped just a little, as if releasing a burden he did not know he was holding. He said they had checked the report, and it did not match her car or her description, and that the stop should have ended sooner. Maya listened without showing relief, because she knew moments could still change, but inside she felt a small warmth rise, not victory, not pride, but understanding. The officer said he was sorry for the stress, and the word sorry hung in the air, rare and real. A second officer stepped back, giving her space, and said she was free to go whenever she was ready. Maya thanked them calmly and turned toward her car, moving slowly just as before, Because habit stayed, even when danger passed. She opened the door and paused. For a moment, looking back at them, and said quietly that she hoped no one ever had to learn calm the hard way. But if they did, she hoped they would be allowed to show it. The officers watched her without speaking, and for the first time their faces held respect, not suspicion. Maya sat in her car and closed the door, the familiar space wrapping around her like a shield. She placed her hands on the wheel and took one deep breath, feeling the tension leave her shoulders. The lights shut off, and the road returned to darkness and quiet. The officers stepped away, and the moment ended. Not with drama, but with understanding, and the audience would feel the power of the reveal that her secret was not about fighting back with force, but about standing firm with knowledge and calm. And as Maya drove away, the night seemed less heavy, and the lesson stayed clear. The true strength did not shout. It stayed steady, waited its moment, and changed everything by simply refusing to break. As Maya drove away from the quiet road, the night air felt lighter, but her hands still rested firmly on the wheel, because moments like that did not end the instant the lights disappeared. They stayed in the body for a while, like an echo. She checked her mirrors once more out of habit, and saw only darkness behind her. The houses faded, and the road opened ahead. Long and empty, she let out a slow breath. She did not know she had been holding, and focused on the sound of the engine and the steady lines on the road. Her mind replayed the stop, not with fear now, but with clarity, noticing the small shifts, the way the voices had changed, the way space had opened when understanding entered. She thought about how close the moment had come to going another way, and how thin the line often was between calm and chaos. She drove past the old store and turned toward her neighborhood. The streets familiar and quiet, and as she parked near her home, she sat still for a moment, letting her body catch up with the present. She rested her forehead lightly against the steering wheel and breathed slow, then lifted her head and stepped out. The cool air felt different, now softer. She walked inside and locked the door behind her. The room greeted her with silence and warmth. She set her keys down and poured the tea she had imagined earlier, the steam rising gentle and steady. She sat at the small table and wrapped her hands around the cup, feeling the heat seep in. Her phone buzzed softly with messages from friends checking in because someone nearby had seen the stop and shared it quickly. Maya answered simply that she was home and safe, and that was enough. She did not want to relive it. Yet later that night she lay awake thinking not about fear, but about responsibility, about how many people stood in moments like that, without preparation, without words, without the chance to be seen. She thought about the officers too, about how power could shift when listening replaced assumptions. She knew not every story ended the same way, and that knowledge sat heavy, but it did not turn into bitterness. Instead, it strengthened her resolve. The next day, the story of the stop spread quietly in the community, not as a headline, but as a lesson. Neighbors spoke about the calm woman who stood firm, and the officers who stepped back when truth was shared. Conversations formed not with anger, but with questions. People asked how she stayed so steady, how she spoke without shaking, how she knew what to say. Maya answered when she could, using simple words, telling them calm was not something she was born with. It was something she built slowly over time, through learning, through mistakes, through listening. She said knowledge was not about winning, it was about surviving with dignity. Days passed, and the moments settled into memory, but it did not fade, it sharpened her purpose. She began holding small talks at community centers, not formal, not loud, just conversations where people could ask questions about rights, about staying calm, about understanding fear without letting it lead. She shared her story not to scare, but to prepare, and people listened because her voice carried truth, not drama. She reminded them that calm did not mean silence, and strength did not mean force. It meant clarity. It meant breathing when everything urged panic. It meant knowing when to speak and when to wait. She never spoke badly of the officers from that night. She spoke about systems and moments, and how both sides carried weight and risk. The balance mattered, and respect could change outcomes. Some listened Closely others nodded slowly, and the ripple spread small but real. One evening weeks later, Maya received a message from someone she did not know thanking her for sharing, saying that during a stop they remembered her words and stayed calm, and the moment passed without harm. Maya read the message twice and felt a quiet pride, not loud, not public, but deep. She knew this was why she had trained, why she had spoken, why she had stayed steady that night. The power shift she had felt was not about control over others. It was about control within herself and the courage to share that control with others. As the weeks turned into months, the memory of flashing lights no longer tightened her chest. Instead, it reminded her of the choice she had made to prepare, to learn to stand tall without raising her voice. She continued her life working, laughing, but always aware, always ready, not for a fight, but for understanding. And somewhere on that quiet road, the lesson lingered that power could change hands without force, that calm could slow time, that a secret built on knowledge and self-respect could turn fear into a moment of growth. And for the audience watching her story, the message stayed clear, that real strength often arrived quietly, stood its ground, and left the world just a little safer than it found it. In the weeks that followed, Maya noticed small changes in herself and in the people around her, changes that did not shout but settled quietly into daily life. She returned to her routines: work mornings, evenings at home, simple walks through her neighborhood. But now people greeted her with new looks, some curious, some respectful, some thoughtful. She did not see herself as special, yet she understood that stories had weight, and once shared they moved on their own. The calm she carried that night stayed with her, not as tension, but as confidence, the kind that came from knowing she could face pressure without losing herself. One afternoon, she received a message from a local community group asking if she would speak at a small meeting about staying safe during difficult encounters. Maya hesitated at first because she did not like attention, but she remembered the feeling of standing alone on that road and decided that if her words could help even one person, then it was worth stepping forward. The meeting was held in a simple room with folding chairs and soft lights. People of different ages filled the space. Some nervous, some tired, some hopeful. Maya stood at the front and spoke plainly. She told them she was not an expert, not a hero, just someone who learned the hard way that knowledge and calm could change outcomes. She explained how fear spoke loudly in the body, but did not always speak truth. She taught them simple things: how to breathe slowly, how to keep hands visible, how to speak clearly without adding anger to fear. She reminded them that respect went both ways and that dignity was something worth protecting. The room stayed quiet as people listened, and when she finished, questions came, not sharp, but sincere, and she answered each one honestly without pretending to have all the answers. The respect in the room felt real, earned, not demanded. After the meeting, a man approached her and said he worked as a first responder and thanked her for reminding people that calm helped everyone, not just one side. That moment stayed with her because it showed her that understanding could cross lines that often felt fixed. Days later, she received an unexpected message from the police department asking if she would be willing to join a community discussion panel about communication during traffic stops. Maya paused, reading the message twice. She felt a mix of caution and hope, but decided to accept. Because change required conversation, the panel was small and quiet, held in a local hall. Officers and community members sat together, not across from each other, but in a circle. Maya spoke about her experience again, but this time she focused on what helped, not what hurt. She explained how small actions, tone of voice, space between bodies, clear explanations could lower fear quickly. An officer across from her nodded and admitted that training often focused on control more than communication, and hearing her perspective mattered. The conversation did not solve everything, but it opened doors. And when Maya left that night, she felt a sense of progress, slow and fragile, but real. Back at home, she reflected on how far the moment on the road had traveled, from fear to dialogue, from tension to learning. She understood that respect had replaced fear, not just for her, but for others. who watched and listened. Her life continued without headlines, without praise, but with purpose. She kept sharing when asked and listening when needed. She reminded herself that power was not something to hold tightly, but something to use carefully. The calm she practiced became a bridge between worlds that often misunderstood each other, and the audience watching her story would see that the greatest change did not happen under flashing lights, but afterward, in quiet rooms, in honest conversations, in the choice to keep showing up with patience and clarity. Maya knew the work was ongoing and that not every story would end the same way, but she also knew that each moment of understanding mattered, and as she moved forward, she carried the lesson that when fear steps back, respect has room to grow, and when respect leads the path forward, becomes just a little clearer for everyone. As time passed, the night of the stop slowly became a quiet chapter in Maya's life, not something that ruled her days, but something that shaped her direction. She no longer replayed the flashing lights with fear. Instead, she remembered the moment when calm met pressure and did not break. She understood that the true change did not happen on the road alone, it happened afterward, in the choices she made to speak, to listen, and to stand steady when it would have been easier to stay silent. Maya continued her work and her simple routines, but her voice now carried farther than she expected. People reached out from different places, sharing their own stories, moments of fear, moments of confusion, moments where they wished they had known how to stay grounded. Maya listened more than she spoke, because listening was part of the calm she had learned, and when she did speak, she used the same simple words she used that night, slow, clear, and honest. She reminded people that they were not weak for feeling afraid and not wrong for wanting to protect themselves. She told them that calm was not the absence of fear, but the decision not to let fear decide everything. One evening, Maya sat alone by her window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance, and thought about the person she once was before she began her training, before knowledge became her shield. She felt compassion for that version of herself and for everyone still standing at the beginning of that path. She knew not everyone had access to classes or books or guidance, so she began creating simple guides, written in plain language, sharing steps anyone could understand: how to breathe, how to speak, how to pause before reacting. These guides were shared quietly, passed from hand to hand, not as rules, but as tools, and slowly stories returned to her of people who felt more prepared, more confident, more seen, even in hard moments. Impact was not loud, but it was real and steady, like water shaping stone. Months later, Maya was invited to speak at a school, not about law or fear, but about self-respect and awareness. She stood in front of young faces and told them that strength did not always look like standing tall. Sometimes it looked like stepping back. Sometimes it looked like asking questions. Sometimes it looked like staying calm when others expected anger. The students listened and asked questions, and Maya saw hope there, the kind that grows when understanding is planted early. As she walked home that day, she realized something important. Her secret had never been about fighting back. It had been about choosing how to respond, choosing dignity, choosing clarity, choosing humanity, even when the world felt uncertain. The night of the stop had tested that choice, and she had held it not perfectly, but truly. And that truth had moved outward, touching lives she would never fully know. One quiet morning, she received a final message from someone who simply wrote, "I remembered your story, and I stayed calm, and everything changed." Maya read the words and felt tears rise, not from sadness, but from meaning. She understood then that the story had reached its end, not with applause or closure, but with continuity, with lessons carried forward. The road where she once stood under flashing lights was now just a road again, but the lesson remained alive in choices made every day. The story closed not with sirens or commands, but with a simple truth that stayed with the audience long after the screen faded: that calm can be taught, that dignity can be protected, and that sometimes the most powerful change begins in silence, steady breath, and the courage to remain human when everything else urges you not to be.